Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the PSTE Subcommittee. Apologies for being a little bit late. As you can see, we're down a few senators for various reasons today, but we're going to move forward all nonetheless. We have two budgets today, the Maryland Energy Administration and the Maryland Insurance Administration. We're going to go in that order. And first, we are joined by Samuel Quist to present MEA's budget. Samuel.
Thank you, Senator Elfreth and members of the subcommittee. Samuel Quist from the Department of Legislative Services. Present the MEA budget analysis beginning on page 1 of the report. The MEA budget in fiscal 2025 totals $200 million, which is approximately a $29.5 million increase, or about 17.3% from the fiscal 2024 working appropriation. You can see on page 1 how there's been some significant growth in the overall budget for MEA since fiscal 2023. The total funding that year was about $82 million. I'm going to turn ahead now to the bottom of page 9 and the beginning of page 10 in the report, where there are some actions in the fiscal 2024 allowance that are discussed. The first item is that the fiscal 2024 budget bill included language allocating $9.2 million in special funds from the Maryland Gas Expansion Fund within the SEEF to be used for the restricted purpose of projects relating to repairing existing natural gas infrastructure in the Washington Gas Service Territory. The analysis is asking MEA to briefly comment on the status of the use of that funds, as well as what if there are any plans for the use of approximately $1.6 million in fund balance remaining in future years. The fiscal 2025 allowance does not currently include any funding from this source. Also on page 10, there's a discussion of fiscal 2024 deficiency appropriations. These total approximately $3.1 million, including funding from the Maryland Offshore Wind Business Development Fund and federal funding from the State Energy Program, including funding used to fund the conversion of 3 contractual full-time equivalent positions to regular positions. Turning to page 11, Exhibit 5 is showing an exhibit on the overview of agency spending. You can see that the largest portion of the budget in fiscal 2025 is for renewable and clean energy programs and initiatives, approximately 81% of the total budget. Within this category, the largest area is approximately $100 million of solar energy related programming. This category also contains funding for transportation programs, including funding for the electric vehicle supply equipment rebate program and the $10 million in mandated funding for the medium duty and heavy duty zero emission grant program. Turning to exhibit number 6 on page 12, this is showing a breakdown of the agency budget by fund source. As you can see here, about 51% of the budget is funded through strategic energy investment funds sourced from alternative compliance payments made under the state's Renewable Portfolio Standard Program, whereas the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative source SEEF funds consist of about 35% of the overall budget. This is significant because in prior years, RGGI source SEEF funds have made up the primary ongoing source of MEA revenues. The increase in ACP revenues is significant, as fiscal 2025 is only the second fiscal year that funds from this source have been incorporated into the MEA budget. There's approximately $50 million from this source in FY 2024. This is reflective of a general growth in ACP payments required under the RPS program. Specifically, the analysis in a future section of the analysis includes an exhibit on the solar carve out of the RPS program and explains some of the growth in compliance payments required under the program. On this chart, I would also highlight there are 2 categories of federal funding. There's $7.4 million from the federal state energy program administered by the U.S. Department of Energy, as well as $8.8 million in the federal preventing outages and enhancing the resilience of the electric grid, which is formula funding allocated to Maryland under the federal infrastructure bill. Under the other category, I would highlight that there is a total of $7.3 million in funding for offshore wind related programs from the Maryland Offshore Wind Business Development Fund and the Offshore Wind Development Fund. The proposed budget changes begin on page 14 and continue on page 15. Beginning under the personnel expense categories, personnel expenses increased by a total of $844,000. This includes the cost of 5 new regular positions, 3 of which are the result of the contractual conversions that I mentioned previously. Under the programmatic changes, I'm not going to go through each individual item in particular, but I would highlight that overall, under the renewable and clean energy programs and initiatives, there's an increase of about $55.5 million, whereas under the energy efficiency and conservation programs, there's a decrease in funding of about $26.5 million. And this roughly corresponds to the breakdown between ACP funded programming and RGGI funded programming. ACP funding in the budget increases by about $52 million, whereas RGGI funding decreases by about $22.6 million. Highlighting on page 15, this chart breaks out solar energy related programs. These 5 programs in total increase in spending by about $70.2 million. Next, I'm going to turn to the personnel data on page 20. This is showing, as I mentioned previously, there's an increase in 5 regular positions and a net decrease of 1 contractual position. Contractual positions include a decrease of 3 from the contractual conversion, as well as a separate increase of 2 additional contractual positions in FY 2025. Turning now to the issues section of the analysis, the first issue beginning on page 21 includes an additional discussion of the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative program, as well as program revenues and their uses by other state agencies. The first exhibit in this section, exhibit number 9 on page 22, is providing a summary of the current state membership in the RGGI program, reflective of the withdrawal of the state of Virginia effective January 1st. This section of the analysis also notes that there's current pending lawsuits in the state of Pennsylvania, whether that state will eventually join the program. It's yet to be seen whether actions in those 2 states will have any impact on the RGGI program market. Exhibit 10 on page 23 is showing summary data on the RGGI program auctions held since fiscal 2021. This is showing that exhibit 62, auction 62, which was the most recent auction held in December of 2023, there was both the highest auction clearing price as well as the highest revenue total achieved by the state of Maryland in an individual auction to date during the history of the RGGI program. The auction clearing price, which is shown in the red line, reached $14.88 per allowance, and the revenue achieved by Maryland in that auction was $50.6 million. Exhibit 11 on page 24 is showing similar data broken down by fiscal year totals of revenue attained by the state of Maryland. As you can see, that revenues have been heightened since fiscal 2022. In fiscal 22 and 2023, they've exceeded $140 million. And in fiscal 2024, mid-year, the revenues have totaled $86.8 million, suggesting that full year revenues for fiscal 2024 could likely meet or exceed revenues from the prior fiscal year. Page 25 of the analysis includes additional discussion on some of MEA's revenue forecasting methods. The analysis briefly asks MEA to comment on its decision for using the clearing price in fiscal 2025 budget estimates. In prior years, MEA had used an average clearing price from the 8 most recent auctions held. However, in the fiscal 2025 budget, there's an average of 7 most recent auctions held, which leads to a slightly less conservative method for revenue projections, including in the fiscal 2025 budget cycle. The statutory required distributions for SEAF sourced from the RGGI program begins on page 26 and 27. Pages 26 and 27 discuss some of the other individual required distributions under statute. These include $2.1 million for the Maryland Energy Innovation Fund, which supports the expenses for the Maryland Clean Energy Center and the Maryland Energy Innovation Institute at the University of Maryland College Park. There's also a transfer of $8.25 million in C funds to the Transportation Trust Fund to support the Zero Emission Vehicle Excise Tax Credit Program. Two other required transfers occur under the Clean Energy Jobs Act, including $1.25 million in fiscal 2025 for the Small Minority and Women-Owned Business account within the Department of Commerce, and $1 million to the Clean Energy Workforce account in the Maryland Department of Labor. On page 27, the analysis asks MEA to briefly comment on the fact that the transfer of C funds to the Small Minority and Women-Owned Business account in fiscal 2024 was approximately $500,000 less than what was allocated in statute, and asking if there's a plan to allocate that additional $500,000 in the future. Exhibit 13 on page 28 is showing a summary of C funds sourced from the RGGI program used across all state agencies in the fiscal 2025 allowance. In total, there's $176.0 million allocated. In addition to MEA, the largest allocation is for energy assistance under the Department of Human Services Office of Home Energy Programs, which totals about $94.1 million in fiscal 2025. In total, across all state agencies, there's a decrease of approximately $26.6 million in C fund appropriations. The majority is due to a decreased amount of C funds budgeted under MEA. There's also a decrease of $5 million going towards the Department of Human Services for energy assistance costs. At the bottom of Exhibit 13, there's a note on the governor's fiscal 2025 budget proposal. Includes a total of $90 million in C fund balance budgeted under the dedicated purpose account. In Exhibit 13, the dollar amount is listed as to be determined because in the materials from DBM, it was unspecified whether the entirety of that fund amount would come from RGGI sourced CEF appropriations versus ACP sourced CEF. Exhibit 14 on pages 29 and 30 is showing projections for the end of year fund balance for the entirety of the CEF fund at the end of fiscal 2025, reflecting the $90 million transfer to the dedicated purpose account. The projected balance is $91.3 million. This section of the analysis also asks MEA to comment on the buildup of fund balance under the administration subaccount, which at the end of 2025 is estimated to total $43.5 million. Turning to the second issue in the analysis, beginning on page 31, this is a discussion of the two home energy rebate programs, which will be funded through federal funding allocated to the state of Maryland under the Federal Inflation Reduction Act. Previously, the Department of Energy has announced a total of $136.8 million in federal funding for these two programs. The programs include the Home Energy Performance-Based Whole House Rebate Program, which funds energy efficiency projects that achieve a whole house energy efficiency reduction. And the second program, the High Efficiency Electric Home Rebate Program, which funds the purchase of certain eligible energy efficiency appliance upgrades. There's also a third program funded through the IRA, the state-based home energy efficiency contractor training grant program. There's a formula allocation to Maryland of $2.5 million under that program. MEA was asked to submit a joint chairman's report response, providing an update on the application and implementation of these two programs. This section of the analysis includes a summary of some of that data. As far as the application process, MEA is required to submit an application to the Department of Energy to access the state of Maryland's funding allocation including identifying specifically how these two programs will be implemented under the federal guidelines. Federal guidelines allow MEA to submit an initial application to access an initial 2.5% of program funding for administrative and development purposes. In its report, MEA indicated that it had submitted an application in January 2024 for this initial portion of funding, and that following a period of program design and implementation, a full funding application could be submitted in late spring of 2024. MEA anticipates that as far as the program implementation, the implementation could be running by the second half of calendar 2024. However, the timeline of that implementation will ultimately depend on the timeline of the federal approval process by the U.S. Department of Energy. The final issue in the analysis, which I'll just cover briefly because I know there was another hearing on this, funding for electric vehicle charging infrastructure. I would just highlight that in addition to the formula funding that the state of Maryland received that's administered by the Maryland Department of Transportation, the analysis points out on page 36 that in January of 2024, it was announced that there was a $15 million grant to a public-private partnership led by the Maryland Clean Energy Center to develop community electric vehicle charging infrastructure. Exhibit 16 is briefly summarizing data on electric vehicles registered in Maryland and the total number of electric charging ports in Maryland as well, including charging infrastructure incentivized by MEA through its transportation programs. As you can see, there's been a significant increase in electric vehicle registration from fiscal 2019 to 2023. Lastly, the analysis notes that MEA has a forthcoming study on electric vehicle charging in multifamily residential buildings. And additionally, in the update section of the analysis notes that there's a forthcoming report from the Task Force on Solar Incentives, which met during the 2023 interim. To conclude with the DLS recommended actions on pages 39 and 40, DLS is recommending 3 items of committee narrative. The first item is annual narrative directing the Department of Budget and Management to include data on revenue accounting for the Strategic Energy Investment Fund in the governor's budget books next year. The second recommended action is requesting that MEA provides a report on Federal Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act and Inflation Reduction Act funding for energy-related programs that the department has applied for or received funding for, including providing a specific update on the 2 home energy rebate programs and their implementation. The final recommendation is to ask MEA, in partnership with the Department of Budget and Management and the Maryland Department of the Environment, to submit a report on the specific uses of the $90 million in C funds budgeted under the dedicated purpose account. That concludes my presentation, and I can take any questions.
Thank you, Samuel. Thorough as always. Senator Jackson, any questions? I do have one. I'm curious. I flagged on page 29. I flagged the 43 million in administration costs in C fund balance. So I'll be interested in when the director comes up. But what has it typically been used for?
That would be the general MEA administrative expenses. So it funds their personnel costs, other operating expenses of the agency, program administrative costs.
Got it. Okay. Director Penske. Anybody from your team? Yep.
Jimmy Cobb, was Director of Finance and Administration.
Welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to appear today, and thank the committee. First, let the agency thank Mr. Quist for his sound and thoughtful review of our budget and the finances. And let me go on the record to say that we concur with the 3 recommendations included in the report. I don't have to repeat them. He shared the three as they're stated. So we agree with those recommendations. If I could, Madam Chair, let me give a little contextual view of where we are, and then more specifically detail our response to the questions at the end of the report. We'll try not to take up too much time. As everyone here is aware, the legislature passed the Climate Solutions Now Act 2 years ago. And that 60% reduction is, I call, one of the rails we're riding on. The second rail basically is the administration's call for 100% clean energy by 2035. That's sort of the second rail. So they are driving a lot of our work, both though with the understanding of what we call Justice 40 for shorthand, that we have to really pay a lot of attention to the communities that have been overburdened and underserved. So that's a lens that is running through all of our work. Every time we put a grant, we say, how does that deal with that issue of the historic underfunding in those communities, poor communities, many of them Black and brown. So that's an undercurrent. On top of that, obviously, which I'll come back to in a moment, is the federal infusion, which we haven't seen yet, but we should be seeing. That's the IRA and the IIJA money, which Mr. Quist referred to. And finally, look, 2023 was the hottest year on record. I mean, that's an objective reality that also undergirds all of our work going forward. In 83, we distributed $82 million. Thank you. We distributed $82 million in grants and loans. 24, I think it's in the mid 90s. And obviously we have the 25 in front of you. We generally had two pots of money. We had the RGGI from the auction. We're one of 10 states, and it comes back pro rata. And the second was alternative compliance payments, when people either chose or didn't want to pay the OREC prices, SREC prices, and they would pay the alternative compliance payment, also called ACP. Up until 18 months or so ago, the ACP ran around $500,000. And you go to sleep and you wake up in the morning and it's $70 million. So it's seen a drastic increase. And the projections for the next year or two are continued increases. Not quite as drastic as the 700% growth, but we do see increases. And in fact, ACP, for the first time, actually contributes more money than the RGGI fund. And that's to say, at the same time, the RGGI fund has been going up, so it's not like stagnant. So even with RGGI going up, and the last one, as Mr. Quist showed on the chart, was one of the highest and not the highest, ACP is outreached in terms of now being 52 or 54%. So what has our response been to a lot of this? Well, we are expanding our solar energy equity program. And whereas we've had a program for a number of years where anybody could apply for a rebate if they put solar on their roof, unfortunately, that a lot of it went to middle class and upper middle class individuals who had the capacity and the money to put out the $23,000 or $27,000. It was very minimal, $1,000. We have this program which we're expanding, where low-income people who own their own house, who are probably house rich and cash poor, who want to do solar, that we will allow up to $25,000, including up to $5,000 for repairing roof to make it stable enough. And again, it'll hit fewer houses, but we'll essentially cover virtually the full cost. So for those working in poor families who do own their own house, we can lower their bills to the point of it maybe being zero. Or in some seasons, they might actually get rebates because the wheel will spin in the reverse direction. For the other low and moderate income people who don't own their own house, and that's a large number of people who rent either in a row house or a multifamily apartment building, community solar. And that's where they can sign up, they can subscribe, and get a 20% deduction in their bill. And they're also contributing, obviously, to clean energy. And that number is growing exponentially. And last year, the legislature passed legislation to move it from a pilot program to a permanent program. And we expect to see a lot more growth there as well. A couple of other quick programs. Let me just jump around here. Yeah, decarbonizing schools. Let me talk about that for a minute. We've upped that budget item to $24 million. About 6 years ago, and I could be off by a year, MEA, pre my time there, paid the margin, almost all of the marginal difference for 3 schools in the state that wanted to be net zero, 2 in Baltimore City and 1 in Howard County. It's terrific. I mean, they were in the queue and they decided we want to put in geothermal, we want to put in heat pumps, we want to put in solar, and they're great. I mean, they're actually gathering more energy than they're using, which is where we want to be. And that was only 3, and then there's been like a lull for 5 years. So we would like to duplicate those 3 schools this year and even go to even more schools. Now, we can't require it, at least the law does not call for us, but we want to let all the LEAs know we have money available to do that. And if some don't want to build a whole new school on clean energy, some of it can be used for solar, rooftop, or simply a heat pump or whatever. It doesn't have to be the whole enchilada, as it were. So we're pretty excited. We want to really reinvigorate that program and have it be a model, and not necessarily just for the Baltimore-Washington corridor. We'd like it on the Eastern Shore and the Western Mountains, so it becomes a showpiece. So people say we can do this, and also in the 3 schools where it exists now, it's part of the science curriculum. So the students are educated about what clean energy can do, and when PTA meetings held in the school, parents are also made aware of it. And we'd like to do that even more, like I said, on the Eastern Shore and Western Mountains as well. We have instituted 2, I hate to call them rubrics, but we get many applications to distribute our money. And each one, they're competitive. It's not like everyone gets money, but we are putting to the forefront how will it fare in terms of reducing greenhouse gases compared to B, the bang for the buck. And the second is also the Justice 40 issue. Are we helping working and poor communities and not just shifting them to, I'm going to use for example, Potomac in Montgomery County. And so we're instituting those, excuse me, as well. And let me just, with that, let me go to the number of questions that were in the guideline, which I know you've had a chance to read our response. The first 2 questions have to do with money that would go to Washington Gas. It came from the Alta agreement, I don't know how many years ago. And if I can use the name Delegate Corman, this has been an issue he has felt very strongly, both on the Budget Committee and now with the Environment Committee in the House. And the money can now be used with a change in language, I think last year, for repairing existing natural gas. It's not necessarily to extend it and put in more pipe. We want to move in the other direction of trying to reduce our dependence on gas and oil in the pipe and move towards clean energy. Additionally, in the budget, it calls for a $1.6 million leftover after the $9 million is allotted. And the question is, what do we plan on doing with it? And at this time, and I want to underline at this time, we don't have a position on how we want to spend it. So that's sort of put on the side, and it won't be spent until that is reliably decided. On the third question, how do we make our projections for next year, the year after, on what we expect from the regional greenhouse gas auction? Well, it used to be the last 8 auctions would be averaged out, and that would be the number we'd use for projection. DBM strongly suggested that we drop that from 8 to 7. And it's so our last 7 auctions are averaged out, and that's the projected number we use to figure out what it'll be. And it's done every quarter. So again, trying to figure out a budget of a projection, which may be high, it may be low, is a bit of a crapshoot, and either you can get stuck and have too much money if you lowballed it, or you can be short if you highballed what you thought it would be. So going from the 7 most recent to the 8 most recent, we think is reasonable. We think it's working, and it so happens in the last calculation, the 8th one was very low. So it really had a significant upswing of what the average projection would be. I'm almost near the end, and we'll open up the questions. As Mr. Quist said, we have a number of funds that come into MEA through RGGI, but then they go back out to Commerce, to DHS, MDE, and others. They don't always pull their money at the appropriate time. So it will look as we've got a lot of money at a certain point. So some of the money that show in this minority business, it just hasn't been pulled by the Department of Commerce. So I hate to point fingers at another agency, but we are sort of a conduit. And depending on when they pull their money out to utilize, and we think they are utilizing it, it sort of sits with us and people sort of scratch their head. Finally, well, almost finally, we've had a significant fund balance, and it comes to a lot of reasons. One, the one I just mentioned, that agencies are not pulling their money at a certain time. The ACP went up from 500,000 to 70 million, money rolling over. So there have been some significant times that we've had at certain dates over the course of a year of significant money. We are not, and I'll say it for the record, trying to hoard money. We want to have money in, money out. We want to use it to do the 100% clean energy by 2035 and reduce greenhouse gases. We are not a bank. We don't want to charge interest. We want to just shift that money in and out. But there have been times, because we've got to make guesstimates. We don't know how much is coming in to auction now. So that's a challenge, and so do you lowball the figures and have extra money, or do you highball the figures and then maybe be short in some of your programs? So this year, I think we're probably going to give out $94 million approximately. So we would like to give out as much as comes in, but we've got to keep some type of cushion, and it's not always easy. It's not like a general fund that you've got to deal with. We're self-funded, as you know, through RGGI and ACP. There has been a significant amount of money in our administrative account. Last year, this legislature increased the amount of money we can use for administration, 10%, but no more than $7.5 million. It was $5 million. Now, we didn't get to that point, and we think over the course of the next couple of years, that amount of money that has been in the administrative account is going to go down, because we have more programs, and the more programs you have, you need more staff to review the applications, to vet them because they're competitive. And then, particularly in Jimmy Cobb's department, they have to track the money that's being spent appropriately. So we think while it might seem a little bit large at the moment, we think it's going to go down, which leads to the final point. And I'm sure you've been briefed or know that DBM administration has recommended taking $90 million out of our account to put towards the climate solution plan. As you also know, in the climate solution plan, it called for the spending of $1 billion a year. That was not turned into policy. There's no tax increase or shifting of money that gets that $1 billion. So after DBM reviewed and others reviewed our budget, they said, we think we can safely take $90 million from the excess, and I put that in quotes, to spend on some of the recommendations in the climate solution implementation plan. Now, that's not public yet. It's still being worked on. We think at the end of the day, MEA, our own agency, and MDE will be spending some of that money. So it's not like this is all being taken from us, because we think it's going to go back to some programs that we support at the same time. And at the bottom of the last page, it shows the 5 categories where the money will be taken from, including administration, $21 million. So, Madam Chair, with that, let me stop and open it up for questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for your presentation. Quick question, couple quick questions for you. The Innovation Fund that's at the at College Park campus, that contract is there. Is there a duration on that contract?
I have my staff with me and I don't have an answer. Can anybody? Eric Kaufman is Director of Programs for MEA.
You can pull your chair.
Oh, sir.
Yeah, if you have to be on camera, needs to grab you. So.
For the record, Eric Kaufman, Division Director of Energy Programs, and good afternoon. No, there is not a specific expiration date, but we do a memorandum of understanding each year that outlines the use of the funding.
So do we see those, or do you just do it within the agency and when we do a joint report
That's done within the agency.
within the agency? Okay. All right.
Yeah, we have, putting aside what's called SERP, where it's a rebate for people who put rooftop, where we have thousands.
Right.
We still get over 200, 250 requests.
Right.
Whether it's on geothermal or electric vehicles or electric vehicle infrastructure. So bringing all of those back here, I think would
No, I got you.
overwhelm you. So that's, as Eric said, it's kept within the agency.
Right. And so specifically, if the MOUs are updated every year, are they criteria specific, or they're just done every year?
Depends on the nature of the MOU. Some are very specified in statute as to the uses, and then there are others where, depending on the nature of the intended use, where we add additional criteria. We have usually 8 to 10 memoranda of understanding a year with other agencies, and they vary.
And if I could just illuminate, we have 20 plus types of programs by and large. And again, you can figure out what they are. They are solar, different types of solar. We have energy efficiency. We have electric vehicles, electric vehicle infrastructure, charging stations. And then we have another general category called the open category, which allows for innovation. So we have multiple type programs that they can plug into. Eric, you want to add anything?
Yeah, our programs as a whole, we try to customize them to meet the needs of Maryland, to achieve greenhouse gas reductions, as Director Pinsky mentioned earlier, the Justice 40 lens. Equity, we have about 20 programs, varies by year. Sometimes we consolidate some, but the open program in particular is our innovation framework. It's our program for things that don't fit under other programs. A lot of good ideas come from outside of our agency, and that's our way to take them in, and we have had a very robust turnout on that program. In fact, this year, I anticipate we will be fully subscribed plus some.
Got you. And the reason I'm asking, Madam Chair, if I might, so the reason I'm asking you, part of my district in one of my 3 counties, right, has the Calvert Cliff nuclear plants. So when we're talking about innovation, does your agency, is there any specific engagements that centers around nuclear energy and as we move forward? I think a few years back, there was a study, the Senate and House, or at least there was a 1-year study maybe, but I'm wondering, as we're looking for better ways, more efficient ways, that if your agency and if it's not in this fund, if it's anywhere you have any conversations regarding that.
Can they come to us?
They can, but the scale.
Yeah. Look, first of all, they're basically run by FERC, by the feds. Depending on the scale, could they apply for one of our smaller grants? They could, but as Eric said, the scale they're talking about are probably hundreds of millions of dollars, which would drain everything we have. Now, I would say in terms of nuclear, their 2 positions come due in like 33 and 35. I could be off by a year. And I think, while this is an official position, a lot of people expect them to be renewed. I will tell you this, that Georgia just opened the first nuclear energy facility in the last, I think, 40 years. So mostly because of cost. Now they are talking about having smaller nuclear facilities around the country, but the cost is still fairly high. I mean, most that are open are staying open because there's a demand, and it doesn't release greenhouse gases. It's not in tier 1, but it doesn't release greenhouse gases, so which is a plus.
Yeah, absolutely. And I only mention that obviously because it's in my backyard, and 37% of our net energy comes from that, 37% or so. So the innovation and because it sits at the College Park campus, that's the reason for the question. Mr. Director, you mentioned something about schools in queue, the net zero schools, and the fact that there's been a lull of nearly 5 years, I think you said, is there can you attribute that to any particular list of challenge? I don't really see the challenges, but
I'm going to shift this in a minute to Eric. The marginal cost between building a traditional counties will apply for money to get in the queue, to get money from IAC. You got to do it for years, and it takes a while.
Right.
Look, there's some counties that aren't building any schools or can't afford to build any schools because it's split, as you know, between the IAC and your money and the local money. As I stated a number of years ago, this agency committed to paying almost all the increased cost. And we basically are saying the same thing again. So if there's a school system, we've been out on the husks trying to sell as much as we can, saying, look, it's not going to cost you a dime. In fact, it's going to save you money because your energy bills are going to go down.
Right.
So that is opening up soon if it hasn't opened up already. I'm not sure why there hasn't been action. I can tell you that in the last 2 years, we are expanding the amount of money. And if they don't want to go for the full tilt of a whole 100% clean energy, we still have opportunities if they just want to put solar on the roof, or heat pumps instead of, gas or oil based heating systems or hot water systems. Eric, anything else?
What it is, the Decarbonizing Public Schools program, it's one of our largest at 24 million. And we've designed, as Director Pinsky mentioned, we've designed it to provide an opportunity for schools, regardless of where they are in the construction and operational cycle. But in terms of net zero schools, one of the best times to approach them is when they're in the design process and the appropriate design phase of the design process, so that we can get early, get those technologies in there, work with them to figure out how to get other savings across the board to give a healthier school, one that is lower operating cost, as well as provides additional education opportunities for the students and the educators within, as well as the surrounding community. And then in addition to that, we are making funding available for solar on existing school roofs, as well as energy efficiency and electrification funds for existing schools as well. So we've really tailored the program to be able to provide an opportunity for school wherever they are working at the district level to come to us, apply for funds to improve those facilities, and then design those next generation facilities.
Yeah, that's it. This is interesting, if I might. What's interesting is the mere fact that they can enhance their energy efficiency without any additional costs. And I'm wondering, I guess, why the LEAs are not taking you up on that, or is there a communication issue? I know we have a couple of meetings coming with our local schools, all of us do, and some of us are in the midst of construction. P3, then Prince George's, and a couple of other school systems. So I was just wondering.
Well, obviously, I've just been in for a year, so we are making a bigger push than what might have been the last 5 years.
We can assist you if you allow us. So.
Well, the thing about this is if you do it before the school is built, where you're going to have your soccer field or baseball field, they run the pipes, a couple feet below, and the temperature is always 55 degrees. So then when it comes in the building to the heat pump, they just have to raise it to 70 degrees or 68 degrees or 71 degrees, right? So you do it before the school is built, and they build it along with all the factors. And there are some architects who that's what they do. They build green buildings, and they have this down pretty well. So in Baltimore, they basically built the same building in two different places. One on the east side and one, I think, more central or west. And then, like I said, there's one in Columbia Middle School. It costs a little more there. They came to the project a little later, and it's a larger school. But the marginal price is very doable, and you'll actually get that money back in energy savings.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Madam Chair, and we would like to partner with you on that. It makes
Great.
sense, all the sense in the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Jackson. George Pinsky, I'll start with an easy one. So we obviously know all the schools in our districts that are in the pipeline, pun intended. Who on your team can we connect our directors of operations and capital planning to in your?
Madam Chair, please refer them to me. We've put
Okay.
together a team within the agency that would be delighted to work with them.
Great. Okay. All right, that was the easy one. I'm going to start with a hard one.
Oops.
The 90 million for SEAF. I think I can speak for the General Assembly when we're all on board to meet our renewable energy goals, but we also are very hesitant to rubber stamp any funding that is kind of undesignated yet. And so I know it's not, you're working in conjunction with other agencies, including MDE, and I'll be posing the same question to MDE, but have we delineated our priorities for that funding yet?
It is actually that discussion is actually taking place now. So in other words, the governor's office, MDE, and ourselves,
Okay.
we had 2 meetings last week, and I think we'll probably have some more this week. My guess is within the next couple of weeks, there will be an announcement. Is that fair?
To the extent you can control it. Yeah, we
Yes,
understand.
it is in process.
Yeah.
I mean, this happened very quickly. I have to
Understood.
tell you.
Yeah.
When the plan came out December 25th, and it suggested $1 billion, but there's no $1 billion to be had,
Mhm.
all of a sudden people started looking around.
Yeah.
And they, as you know, they ended up in some degree in MEA. So they are not locked down, but it looks like it's close.
Okay. And we'll, again, communicate up and down, but I think from a responsible appropriator standpoint, we want to make sure that money is designated.
And I will say this, you know, MDE wrote the report
Mhm.
and they set the priorities. And so we are trying to follow what those priorities are to really get a jump on this, if you can call it a jump.
Thank you. Okay. I think we're gonna get easier from here on out. The ACP jump that we saw from 500,000 to 70 million. How can we predict what led to that severe increase, which is great for us, but how can we responsibly predict that moving forward since it was such a large jump?
Who would like to take that? Okay, Ian?
Sure.
Maybe they get harder. Sorry.
Hi, Ian Ullman. I'm a senior energy advisor. Right. So the ACP is basically because we have a solar carve out in RPS that has and it escalates up to 14.5% by 2030. Now I think it's around 6%, I think, and it's going to continue to increase. At the same time, SRIC prices have dropped, and therefore the energy suppliers are paying those alternative compliance payments rather than procuring the solar energy. That is what is happening. What's going to happen next year, the year after? Hard to predict, right? Because on the one hand, under current law, that requirement for procuring that solar energy is going to continue to increase up to 14.5% under current law. But what's also happening under current law is the ACP price is scheduled to decline.
Right.
So it may be a wash, it may continue to go up. It's a little hard to say.
Okay. And we're having that conversation separate and apart from the budget, but from a budget perspective, just curious how we're going to predict future budgets.
It is a challenge.
It's a challenge. Okay. Moving on, Senator Jackson stole my question about green schools. And I appreciate the nuanced approach you're having moving forward, not just paying for the complete zero off the grid cost, but also marginal. Out of curiosity, what does it cost? Appreciating elementary is different from high school, but what does it cost, or the three that we have? What did it cost then to get completely off the grid?
For a smaller school, I want to say 5 years ago, it was 3 to 5 million. Is that right?
In that
Or
range,
7?
in that range.
But the middle school in Howard County,
Mhm.
and they didn't get it at the very earliest time, and it was the largest school. Theirs went up to 10 or 11. Is that right?
Yeah, definitely in that range. And one of the things we have a benefit from now with the Inflation Reduction Act is expanded enhanced access to investment tax credits, which help defray those costs.
That's my next question. I ordered it specifically for this reason. We're doing well, obviously getting the money out the door of the formula funding. But what are your priorities for going after aggressively that competitive funding, and particularly the more creative financing models at the federal government? You know, I think we're all nervous for what happens in November. So this subcommittee, and I can speak for the Senate, very nervous about Maryland taking advantage while that money is on the table before or if it were to go away.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I forgot to come back to it. We're getting $136 million from the IRA, be spent over 4 or so years. It's basically 2 programs: the home program for energy efficiency, and the HERE program to electrify. And again, that's about 136 million. There's another 20 million in the IIJA, which will cover sustainability in some other areas. So that's coming in, and our first step is trying to get some people, administrators, because when you have all these grants coming in, you gotta oversee it, you know. And I don't want to build up a bureaucracy, but you can't give money away helter skelter as well. So that federal money's coming in. The Department of Energy has access to a large amount of money. And we've heard the phrase, you know, well, some states, maybe Maryland, is leaving money on the table. It's more complicated than that. First of all, you got to pay interest. This is not free money. And whether it's 4, 5, 6%, if it goes directly to the consumer, particularly working poor family, they don't want to take up another loan. And if you go to a third party, a private entity, they got to figure out, is that a part of doing business? So we are in conversation with them. Some states are jumping on that money. We want to be very careful. You know, it's not no strings, essentially. And if we come across a program that makes sense, we're going to push it as hard as we can. And Eric can elucidate on that. In terms of the competitive grants, we looked at all the competitive grants, and representatives from all the affected agencies have been meeting probably for 6 months or so. And we've decided that we are probably going to be second or third on most of the competitive, whether it's transportation, whether it's MDE, will be lead. So we're focusing on formula-driven ones. There's another one called TREC, which is training for people who do the work, you know, for the contractors. We found, and this is really something I've learned, a lot of the holdup and the blockage is the contractors who come out. When your heating system dies, they'll say, well, you need a new heating system. And they'll say you need a new furnace. But if they haven't worked with a heat pump, for example, which is based on being electrified, they won't sell it to you. Or if their company doesn't handle them. And so that's been a real choke point. So we think this TREC application, which closed 3 days ago or 4 days ago, is very important. The more we educate the contractors who are on the ground, and this could be a company of 3 people and a family, or it can be 150 people like Rude or some of these larger companies. So there are a lot of things in play, and we're trying to focus on where the greatest obstacles. Eric, you want to add?
A couple of points I would add is, one, in terms of the formula grants, we worked very, very closely with the National Association, the state energy officials and others to get those to be formula funds so that they would be available to benefit Maryland. And we wouldn't necessarily have to compete for them. We worked at the front end, and that's yielded, you know, a large amount of potential opportunities. Second, you know, by far the largest amount of funding available is the benefits of the tax credits themselves, which is why we're focused. So many of our programs are focused in bringing incentives to help get people to move forward and take advantage of those credits, which will bring more money into Maryland.
I have some questions about rooftop solar, but we can take those offline because we have that conversation once a week now. Senator Jackson.
And thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Director, you mentioned something about the administrative costs that are associated with as you continue to bring more resources into the agency. So are there any partnerships that you have out there that allows for some sort of where you don't have to take the entire hit for the administrative costs, where maybe you can partner with someone else who can help to administer them? Or is that a little too disjointed?
I actually, we had that discussion about 30 minutes ago, 45 minutes ago, when, $136 million to give out. You have lots of applications. Some are to individuals, some are to nonprofits. That's a lot of work. That's a lot of staff. And Eric pointed out that in some cases, if it's going to be 2,000 people applying and someone having to go through those, we might sub it out. But if we sub it out to there are companies that actually do that, they will have to get the administrative cost plus their own cost. So in other words, it's going to be used one way or the other because people have to vet the applications. So the state's not getting hustled by either an individual or a company or a nonprofit.
Right.
So that's going to be a challenge. And I think, the feds have not come out with this money yet. We don't expect it to be probably till fall, and they're working on their own parameters of what it looks like. And they're going to want to plan from us. So we're going to have to figure out how much of it we do it in-house, how much of it we do it out, we sub it out. But in either case, it's going to cost administrative dollars, whether we've got to hire people to do it or whether we get a third party, we're going to have to pay them the administrative costs. So they're going to allow up to 20%. Now, the state allows up to 10% or $7.5 million. They're allowing up to 20%. So a lot of that's going to be used. I think that's just the facts of life.
Maybe with some university partners or something. So we can talk later. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, my final thought is, Director Pinsky, I appreciate having a conservative outlook on the tax credits and financing. I also just want to make sure we don't miss this moment. And if there's a way that we can think about, just the way we borrow for our capital budget, can we set aside dedicated funding to meet, the necessary debt service on that, but be targeted and perhaps work with MCEC to figure out a program to help us meet our green school goals, to help us meet, Senator Kagan, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention her nonprofit initiative, right? How do we put together funding to help us meet those targeted areas? I would love to see a similar program for agriculture and farmers who want to get off the grid. I would love to work with you on that and figure out how do we appreciate the risk that there is, but I'm afraid if we miss this window, we're going to kick ourselves in 10 years.
Yeah, we do have a program that does cover agriculture. So that exists now.
Okay.
I can't tell you all the parameters and how much money, but they had actually gotten, whether it's putting solar on their barns. So we clearly want to, it's called something industry and agriculture. So we do have, that is one of our foremost programs. And we agree with you. And obviously we want to thank you for your work on the solar task force as well.
Great teamwork, and we'll have the bill hearing soon.
Great.
All right. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
I appreciate you. All right. Next, we have the Maryland Insurance Administration, Samantha Tapia. Oh, we have a 2-Sam day. I didn't realize that. Okay. Whenever you're ready, Samantha.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Okay, starting with the operating budget summary, Exhibit 1 on page 2. And our headline, the fiscal 2024 budget for MIA increases by 7.4 million or 17.7% to 49.1 million. This is mostly from an increase in personnel costs, salaries and benefits for personnel, both regular and contractual, for a total of 3.6 million, as well as IT costs, 2.8 million. Most of the budget is occupied by personnel costs at 71% or 35 million, followed by IT at 14% or 6.8 million. Other spending is for fixed and operating costs and for the HEAU, or Health Education and Advocacy Unit, grant in the Office of the Attorney General Consumer Protection Division. Looking at personnel and vacancies, Exhibit 4 on page 7. MIA has made tremendous progress on the vacancy rate, now at 5 vacancies below the budgeted turnover rate, though with variable improvement across sub-programs. We've asked MIA to comment on any impacts of vacancies earlier in the calendar year 2023, and what strategies have most contributed to improvement in the vacancy rate over the year. MI also has new positions this year for the first time in a number of years, 15 new regular positions and a net increase of 8.6 contractual positions. And this is the first addition of positions since 2019, which would have been on 2018 conditions when they only received 2 new positions. The 15 new regular positions, 5 regular positions each for compliance and enforcement, life and health, and property and casualty departments. These positions are intended to address a rising number of complaints and appeals cases, new goals and oversight of network adequacy and mental health parity, and to relieve staff with more expertise from administrative tasks, and introduce more staff with data analysis expertise to study big data and AI-driven models now being used in the insurance market. Looking at a couple key observations, in review of the insurance tracking system development project, we can look at Exhibit 6 on page 10 for the budget table. In review, the ITS project began in 2019 to replace the legacy system that requires extensive use of manual data entry, hard copy, document handling, and data storage in Microsoft Excel. Project cost-related issues led to a vendor default in March 2022. MIA ultimately worked with the Department of Information Technology and the Department of General Services to use the Salesforce master contract to begin new design work again at the end of fiscal 2023. That work has been successfully ongoing and meeting deadlines into January 2024. The original budget or cost estimates was $2 to $3 million. Which is reflected in the appropriated funding line in in Exhibit 6. Although the lack of spending because of the vendor default, you can see in no spending in those early years. But some spending on design work and do-it oversight has taken place through fiscal 2023. Fiscal 2024 included $1.2 million for design and the start of implementation, and fiscal 2025 includes $4 million for ongoing development costs. We've requested MIA comment on the status of project design and the estimated timeline toward completion, and have recommended committee narrative requesting 2 project updates during fiscal 2025. Moving to property and casualty complaints, MIA receives and processes complaints from consumers seeking review of insurance policies for compliance with state insurance laws. The objective is to resolve 90% of complaints within 90 days. Exhibit 7 on page 11 shows that while MIA is usually in the range, or has been in the range of 70 to 90%, fiscal 2023 saw a large decrease in the number of complaints resolved within 90 days, down to 48%. So we've asked MIA to comment or to explain this decrease and discuss its efforts to improve the timeliness of complaint resolution. Finally, looking at the fraud division. The fraud division is primarily responsible for investigating complaints related to alleged insurance fraud by companies, producers, and consumers. Exhibit 8 on page 12 shows the number of cases opened for investigation and number closed within 180 days from 2016 to 2024. There's been a lower rate of closure within 180 days since fiscal 2020, between 30 to 60% after a pre-pandemic trend above 90%. Exhibit 9 on page 13 shows fraud referral cases investigated, referred for prosecution, and charged from 2016 to 2023. At approximately 30%, the trend here also remains below the pre-pandemic levels that were in the range of 60 to 90%. So we've asked MIA to comment to describe the referrals process and provide reasons for the decline in volume of referrals, referrals closed within 180 days, and referrals for criminal prosecution and charging. But apart from the commentary requests and the recommendation for committee narrative regarding the ITS project, we concur with the governor's budget. I can take questions or move to agency testimony.
Thank you, Samantha. Okay. I am blanking on, it's Madam Administrator, yes. Commissioner, okay. My notes never say.
Thank you for the opportunity to address you with respect to our budget this year. With me today is Corey Boone. Mr. Boone is the Special Deputy Commissioner for Innovation and Technology. He's here to answer any questions that you might have with regard to the ITS project, which he took over about a year ago. And it has been sailing since then. So with that, once again, we appreciate the opportunity to address you today. And we particularly thank the Department of Legislative Services and for Ms. Tapia for their very careful and thoughtful analysis. We certainly concur and agree with all of their recommendations. Just again, to put in a little bit of context, so the Maryland Insurance Administration is the organization that oversees the $46 billion insurance industry in the state of Maryland. That includes licensing of insurance companies and professionals, oversight of financial solvency issues, rate and form filing, assuring compliance with the laws that you pass through our market regulation units, and then providing consumer education and advocacy, as well as providing a place for consumers to initiate administrative complaints when they believe that the law has been violated by an insurance company. As Ms. Tapia indicated, the biggest part of our budget is really spent on personnel, and a big second behind that is technology. So the biggest projects that we have at the MIA right now are the ITS project, which has grown over time. So it started as how do we replace a legacy system, and it became, wait a minute, now let's step back and really look at, we don't want to replace a single legacy system. We want a fully integrated approach that's going to carry us forward. And we want a plug and play approach with technology. We want to make sure that we are never tied to a particularly, a system that we've had custom built that's proprietary and becomes obsolete. So we've put a lot of extra time and effort since that initial failure. Our first RFP was successful and we were able to hire a vendor, but literally after their first discovery session, they came back and said, your scope of work is completely out of line with what you want to try to achieve. And so that led to a very early default. And we then went to work with Do It. We tried to work under their one-stop contract, but and when we were here before you last year, we were waiting for those bids to come in. Well, they came in and they were $10 million apart, and that made no sense to us. So Mr. Boone took over the project, frankly, from the MIA standpoint. He immediately began to work under the state's master contract with Carousel, which allowed us to take a different approach to design and analysis, to really step back and make sure that the business units and the potential vendor really did that blueprinting work up front. So when we got to the point where we would have a scope of work, there would be no disagreement and no kind of craziness and a $10 million difference in bids. So we undertook that effort. We then went into a second design phase where we're getting down into the design details. That will conclude at the end, but within the next couple of weeks.
Correct.
Because we've had new divisions come on and say, excuse me, can I now be part of this? And we want to accommodate as much as we can. So as soon as this phase is over with, our MIS and our IT team, our design specialists will sit down with that document, Mr. Boone, and we will then move to an implementation phase. I will note that we expect implementation to begin in the late February, early March timeframe. In order to accommodate that, we have requested a budget amendment for additional dollars to get started. Do It just approved that, and I'm just waiting to hear from DBM about their final approval. So that is well underway, and we are happy to provide updates to you as we do to Do It. In turning to the other elements of our program and the other comments. So when I was here last year, we had a conversation about our vacancy rate, and we took what you said very much to heart, and we went back and we worked on it. And I am very happy that our vacancy rate has gone down substantially. And even for those numbers that were there at the end of 2023, we have filled 3 of them since then. So we are moving very quickly to make sure that we're able to fill positions. And our strategy there is really straightforward. It's making sure that we are purposeful and thoughtful about every time we advertise a position. We take the time to step back and make sure it is the right, we get it right. and we price it correctly, and we offer salary ranges that are more competitive. And when we are in a position where we can't just keep hitting our head against the wall, asking someone to come who could be making $300,000 in industry or in some other sector. We don't try to get those people. We use a contract person where it's appropriate to help set the framework, and then we're hiring more junior people and then training them with that external. So I think we've approached it in a more deliberate way, and I think the success is evident in what we've been able to achieve. There are positions within the executive that really are appropriate for when the final, the insurance commissioner is a weird position because there's this strange disconnect between when the governor becomes governor and when the insurance commissioner. So you have to, I think it's appropriate to wait until the governor has made his green bag appointment and the executive noms committee has acted. And then there are positions within the executive that really are for the commissioner and the governor to appoint. And so I have not wanted to be presumptuous about what the governor will do or what the executive noms committee will do. So that is part of the reason why there's this kind of disconnect in the office of the commissioner as to why there's still a higher vacancy rate there. For property and casualty complaints, we're happy to comment on the reason for that as we do. I'll just be very brief in saying that it's a combination of a higher level of complaints that we're seeing because insurance is going up in cost, and people take advantage of the opportunity to come to us and ask why and what can be done about it. The convergence of that is at the same time that that's happening and those rates are going, those numbers of complaints are going up. We've had a little bit of attrition in the PNC unit, but frankly, the PNC unit is one of those places where pins were drawn from in order to feed other units. So we moved from a $25 billion a year industry to a $46 billion industry in about a 12-year period and got 2 pins. The MIA was asked to take over whole new areas of, PBMs, PSAOs, and all of the other things that, Ms. Tapia mentioned, and yet 2 new pins in that whole time frame. And those 2 pins were not allowed to be filled, incidentally, and some of them were still frozen when I got there in 2020. So the result of many years of that, right, is that we have an entity or divisions that are understaffed. The way we're dealing with that is twofold. Number one, technology and making things more efficient and effective. Number two, triaging approaches, looking more critically at making sure what caseloads are like. And thirdly, additional personnel. I'll say the same thing, although it's slightly different about fraud. The first thing is that we made an error when we submitted the information on our MFR. We transposed a number and we reported a 35 that should have been a 53. So that's one reason why the numbers are down, and that's in our written testimony. The other issue is that we had 2 open positions that were frankly very hard to fill through COVID and right after COVID. They have since been filled, and those individuals have now been percolating for almost a year. They've completed their fraud training and their certification. So we will see more and more productivity from them. The other thing that we've done we've moved our enforcement divisions into the fraud unit so that they are never standing alone again, so that we will be able to kind of train and not be siloed, so that if we have somebody leave the fraud unit, someone in enforcement who's being trained and reporting up to the same structure will be able to fill in the blank. So we've done some things both from an infrastructure standpoint and also getting those pins filled and getting people trained. And then, of course, we are as well we've been looking at our MFRs very carefully. We've changed them for some units. We expect we will change them for the fraud unit in this next cycle to be more thoughtful about 180 days is not a lot of time to investigate some very large fraud schemes. And so we need to right size expectations about what makes sense. With that, I'm happy to take any questions that you have.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for the comments. How many members are in the fraud unit currently?
In the fraud unit?
Yes, ma'am.
I am embarrassed to tell you that I cannot remember the exact number, but I am happy to get that information for you.
Okay, thank you. And ideally, and is there the number of cases or the extensive cases that you have and your turnover rate in the unit as well, and the turnover rate in your fraud unit.
So the fraud and enforcement unit, so if we look at the civil fraud and the criminal fraud investigators, we have a criminal fraud unit that's actually overseen by the Office of the Attorney General. So, and there are 3 assistant attorneys general, I believe, that are assigned to that unit.
Okay.
And we do not oversee them, but they are our PINs. And so the work that they do, there's relatively little turnover in that unit. The person who was the lead assistant attorney general retired after about 30 years, and her deputy is now into that spot. With regard to the civil fraud unit, we had the associate commissioner of fraud retired in 2022, and we've had an acting since 2022. And there were 2 investigators, I believe, that may have left as we were finishing through the pandemic, and then we have replaced them. I can't think of other turnover in that,
Not bad.
in the fraud piece of the unit. There's an enforcement piece, which is all of the producer enforcement work, and I wouldn't say there's a high level of turnover there. There have been a lot of PINs that were not filled because they were frozen or because they were struggling to hire people. Those were unfrozen in 2022.
So Madam Chair, so if they were unfrozen in 2022, the progress on filling those positions?
They're filled now. I mean,
They
we are
Okay.
pretty close to completely filled up in the entire agency. Also, what I did in 2022 was I worked with the Associate Commissioner for Market Regulation and the Associate Commissioner for what was then the fraud unit only, and brought those investigators from enforcement into the fraud unit in order to make sure that we had a larger number of people to cross-train
Makes good.
and to work with each other.
Makes good for continuity. All right. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you. On the fraud, my concern is not just we've gone down significantly, unless cases of fraud have gone down significantly, but I don't think we live in such a world. In our charts here, we have referrals open for investigation and then referrals closed within 180 days. But what about the referrals that have not been open for investigation? How does this track along with that?
Sure. So there are a variety of cases that we get. The standards to submit. So most of our referrals come from insurance companies.
Okay.
And their standard by statute is that they have reasonable cause to believe that fraud may have occurred. When our folks take a look at the case, there are a subset of those that make it into an investigative process. And that is because the standard for civil fraud is clear and convincing evidence. And the standard for criminal fraud is beyond a reasonable doubt. So as those cases come in and they go through a triage, there are a number that do not proceed, because that doesn't mean, incidentally, that they don't become the subject of a civil investigation. So for example, if we see an activity that is reported by an insurance company as potential fraud, that a producer has done something, and our triage folks look at it, the criminal unit says, nope, it's not, doesn't meet that bar. The civil fraud unit is like, we don't really think it meets that bar. That doesn't mean that that producer may not be investigated separately under the producer licensing enforcement rules. It's just that we may have concluded that the activity, while it may have been a violation, does not equal fraud, which is a fairly narrowly defined term. Does that help?
It does help. I just would recommend, as you're thinking about your MFRs, is that narrative somehow, can you bake that into cases referred or something? I just want to make sure no balls are being dropped. Maybe it doesn't meet criminal fraud, but civil. We want to make sure we're covering everybody.
We have to give you a better sense of optics into what we're doing. I completely agree. And that is one of the reasons why the fraud unit is an early part. They're the second unit up, because I'm concerned myself as I try to look into their optics of, this spreadsheet that they're using to try to track where things are going. I think that as we move out of that spreadsheet world, we will have much better data to be able to see, okay, where are the weaknesses in our system? The other part of bringing these other human beings into the fraud unit from enforcement, we've engaged a former FBI agent who is actively training both our traditional civil fraud folks and our enforcement folks to improve their skill sets and their investigative skill sets, and to make sure that they can shift for each other. So the MIA will be happy to be back here next year with much more detailed information.
I greatly appreciate that. And just, I'm pretty sure I'm correct. You don't investigate Medicare or Medicaid.
That is correct.
Okay. So this is all only private. Okay.
The only thing that we would investigate is if there is a producer that is selling a Medicare supplemental insurance product that is being dishonest with respect to that, or there's fraud with respect to that. And we do investigate that.
Okay. And I asked this of Maeve and the state prosecutor. If you're on the ground, you're seeing whether our laws are actually meeting the moment, and especially when you're dealing with criminal activity, they're pretty smart and they're going to work around and find some loopholes. If you see policy changes or policies in the books now that just aren't working to meet your mission, please don't hesitate to bring that to this subcommittee for us to then flag for our colleagues in the policy committees. We often find those policy issues within the budget, and we'll see them faster than we will see them. So I would just ask you to keep an open eye.
Well, we're happy to do that. And we have a bill actually in front of the General Assembly this year where we are looking to cut down on the kind of insurance fraud that happens from storm chasers and from individuals who are on site before the fire is even out.
Yeah.
To try to get them to, sign up for public adjusting services they probably don't need. So that bill is in the General Assembly this year. We just had our hearing in ECM the week before we had the hearing in finance. So we are happy to always highlight that for you as well.
And that brings me to thanking you for always being on the ground whenever my district has a tornado or a flood. Happens more and more. MIA is always there, and I greatly appreciate that. And please let me know how I can be helpful with that bill, because my constituents are the ones being defrauded in that case.
So we will be with you with
Thank you.
The numbers. Thank you.
One more question, and related, a lesson learned from the second tornado we had is the property and casualty complaints. We had an incident with a church that had a roof that was impacted. They filed a claim, turned down, brought it to you all. You agreed with the insurance company. That's okay. But the window to appeal, I believe, is only 30 days. And for a church that has a volunteer lawyer, that wasn't enough time. Have you ever thought about extending that appeal window?
We have not. That doesn't mean that there may not be circumstances in, when it may make sense to do so. 30 days is pretty common across the board. I'm not sure that the MIA would have a problem, with extending that, time frame to 45 days, et cetera. What we do is, it's pretty prominent that that's the date. And I will say, what is required in that circumstance of the fact that they want a hearing, I'm not aware of any circumstance in which the insurance administration has turned down a request for a hearing because it's not complete. So the threshold for what you have to put on paper as to why you want a hearing is pretty minimal. It's not like the filing of a brief.
Right.
So, but we haven't thought about it, but I don't think we would object.
Okay. I just, a Fortune 1000 company is different than a church with lay leaders. And
absolutely. No, it makes perfect sense. I mean, in fact, this year, one of our bills is to make it easier for entities to actually not have to hire a lawyer, but actually be able to come before us without a lawyer, go to a hearing without a lawyer in order to kind of level set for small businesses and organizations.
I appreciate that.
Absolutely.
And what's the bill number on that? Do you? 217 in the Senate? Thank you. Okay, I will look into that, and I appreciate your feedback.
Absolutely.
Okay. I think we're all set. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And for those at home, we are back in this room on Thursday to hear Department of Planning and the Maryland Thoroughbred Racetrack Operating Authority. Thank you all very much.